Well, hi, I'm Dr. Michael McDonald, and in this video I'm presenting the propaganda interpretation of Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And this video is part of a series that's devoted just to interpretations of Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And so I'm not going to be covering some basic stuff like who Plato was and how he relates to Socrates, or even relating the basic story of the cave, because that'll be in the earlier videos, all right, where I'm going to actually be presenting like 7 or 8 different interpretations. And this is material that I presented at the Osher Institute for Lifelong Learning in Palm Desert, California. I'm making it available on YouTube now. Okay, good. So the propaganda interpretation of Plato's allegory is similar to the media interpretation in that emphasis falls on what I have called areas 1 and 2. Now you'll notice that we do have a divided line here, which is divided into 4 sections. And that's what is explained in some of the earlier videos as well. The first 2 sections are the subjective area of the cave itself, where the only illumination is from the fire. And in this analogy, Plato says that there's a fire back in the background and that guards are holding up images of real things like rabbits and coyotes, and then attaching stories to those things as well. And then the fire casts a shadow from the image onto the wall. And we've got a group of prisoners here, and they have been fixed in such a position that this is all they've ever known. So they're having a dramatization here, even though it's 400 BCE, basically of what's going on with television, where we're watching prepared images that have been prepared by others and taking that in as real. For Plato, that's not a great process because the images are not real, and you're taking the image for the real. And you're also taking in the stories of the guards without realizing that that's what you're doing. Now that does go on in television advertising and in the media interpretation. I cover this issue of advertising and the effect that it has on the subconscious mind. With the propaganda interpretation, things are somewhat darker because at this point the guards are, again, interested parties that are not really your friends in the stories and images that they're handing you while you're in the cave, but they are making use of mass media. And the 2 interpretations are obviously related because, yes, it's going to be the case that that the propagandist is going to be using TV advertising. And propaganda for me is a specifically political application of the cave allegory. And that's the other way in which it differs from advertising. The advertiser's goal was simply to make money, whereas I always say something darker is going on with the propaganda, because the propagandist's motive is to gain power. Also, the propagandist is making use of what we would call the low side of our human emotions, particularly making use of racial prejudice, and that's in a process called scapegoating. And then the easy example of that people always use, of course, is what Hitler did in terms of scapegoating the Jews in Germany. And that's a good example in a way, because the basic techniques of propaganda were invented in Germany by Leni Riefenstahl and others, but they made very good use and very conscious use, really in a way for the first time, of the mass media to create effective propaganda that affected a really large portion of the population. Usually, I've characterized the situation down in the cave, down below, where the followers are taking this all in without question. And they are finding that they're low emotions in the sense of racial prejudice, but also things like they have a grievance. And the propagandist is actually stirring up trouble half of the time. A lot of propaganda is used in terms of warfare because nobody wants to go fight and risk their life and die. And so it's necessary to motivate the population to go fight wars. This happens in every single country. And so these well-known techniques of propaganda are what are used to do that. For your own benefit, I would recommend that you look up the 7 techniques of propaganda, because I can only be covering them kind of quickly here. And they do merge to an extent with the techniques that are effective in hypnosis and the techniques that are effective in just plain advertising. In other words, you're making strong images that are being appealing to the emotion and to the subconscious mind. And you're using slogans and you're holding forth ideal images. But I would say that the mark of propaganda in that sense is that the people also have grievances, and the propagandist is blaming those grievances and then holding themselves up as the solution to the problems. And then propaganda also makes use of various fallacies that have been fallacies, since the time of Plato. One of which is the bandwagon effect. Make sure you're part of this big movement because this is the movement of our times. Another one is the isolation of input as far as where you're learning about the world. The propagandist in particular wants to become a demagogue, and therefore there will be a lot of use of force, there will be bullying, and the opponent will be demonized, whether that opponent is a political opponent who's trying to challenge the power. And then they will also slim down all of whatever democratic institutions were at hand and try to concentrate all power and authority into a single set of hands. That's what the demagogue does, and Plato accounts that so accurately in the Republic that as you read those passages, you'll be surprised how easily you can apply what you read there to the modern world, for sure. So the message I have characterized here as being a twisted message, and that I have said that the guards in this form of the analogy are basically the same as either a demagogue trying to rise for power. And I put down that the people in the cave at this point are suckers because they're going for it. And one example would be the Jim Jones experience. Anytime you're allowing somebody to use these techniques against you, you are drinking the Kool-Aid. And I'm not in favor of that, because what I'm a favor of is thinking through things using your own mind, and also to avoid the sense that you're being manipulated by others. So the focus in the propaganda interpretation comes into the cave itself. But as always with Plato, we have to deal with this one section of it that says that the free person, and I put that over here, a free thinker, somebody that has the courage to stand alone or is determined to think things through for themselves and own their own mind, comes back into the cave and in some sense taps the suckers or the prisoners on the shoulder and says, hey, there's another way to live, there's another way to think, don't let yourself be victimized. And if you'll follow me, we'll make an ascent out of this cave and we'll get out into the free light of day. Okay, and then the light of day has always been represented by what's outside the cave entrance. That's sections 3 and 4 of the divided line. And things are entirely different. You're using a different source of illumination at that point. You're using the illumination of the sun, not the fire. And under the light of the sun, remember, Plato said you would see real things, not the shadows of the images of real things that already had stories attached to them. So in this case, when you're outside the cave, you're basically looking around at the social world around you and the political world around you and thinking it through for yourself and realizing that all of the other people in the world, no matter what culture they're from, are real human beings, okay? And they deserve your sympathy and your respect. And when it comes to raining down death upon them by bombing them or threatening genocide by the use of nuclear weapons, you might question whether those are effective techniques for dealing with other human beings. What if they're just like you and are just trying to live their life on this earth? And what if 1/5 or 1/20th of the expenditure on the bombs and stuff had it been spent in peaceful ways, creating hospital ships or reaching out overseas in a friendly manner? Making friends for the United States would also be a good form of defense, right? Because, listen, the demagogue is always saying we're surrounded by enemies. That's how they want to concentrate power into their own hands, and that's how they want to strip you of the rights that you would otherwise have by saying, hey, it's an emergency. And think about it, once you get drafted or put into the army to go fight this war, or you get swept up into the war effort using the jingoism of patriotism, then you're going to be following orders, and in that sense your life is not going to be your own. And we should notice that most acts of killing human beings and most acts of torture, which are the most horrendous acts that a human being can commit during the course of their life, are mostly committed in settings where a person is being given orders. And what we said in Nuremberg was what? Question authority. That you don't have a right to act in an inhumane way, no matter who is ordering you around. So in this sense, the escape from the cave would be knowing what propaganda is, taking the time. Please look up these techniques of propaganda that I've mentioned, and have the determination to not allow yourself to be manipulated. I'm not going to be drinking the Kool-Aid, and I'm not going to go along with the bandwagon of the left or the bandwagon of the right in any case, because I want, democracy for Plato is only going to work, or actually for the founding fathers of the United States, is only going to work with an educated citizenry that elects the right kind of leaders that lead the country in the right kind of direction. And all of those democratic issues are not going to be emphasized when we have emergency. That's always the umbrella under dire threat. We call ourselves the Department of Defense, but we have 600 military bases all over the world. And it's well beyond defense. Defense is taking care of your own borders and making sure other people don't invade you. So escaping propaganda involves a sort of deeply going rethinking of political priorities, where you're starting to inject, remember that stage 4 also, speaking truth to power is mentioned over there. But stage 4 would be also thinking of yourself in cosmic terms, whatever religious orientation you have, whether that is you being a free thinker or a religious person, realizing that you're a citizen of the cosmos first and foremost, and you're going to think things through for yourself and own your own mind. So that would be the stage 4 escape, helpful, along with questioning authority. The difficult journey out of the cave, then, is not undertaken with any kind of a mass movement. Actually, this is one in which you escape the mass movement. You refuse to join the bandwagon. And watch your emotions. Make sure that you're not blaming people. Anytime you're trapped in hatred and ready to go teach somebody a lesson or all fired up, particularly if you're willing to commit murder, which is pulling a trigger and killing somebody, anybody. Stop and think, because it's not some abstract thing called government that's pulling that trigger, that's you. And so it's always important to think your own life through for yourself and think of what you're willing to do or what you're willing to answer for, you know, kind of in ultimate terms. Who do I really want to be? What kind of a world do I really want to create? Okay, I think that was a fairly decent short version of the allegory of the cave from the standpoint of the propaganda interpretation. Again, I'm Dr. Michael McDonald, and I certainly hope that you'll be joining me and tuning in for some of the other interpretations. What I'm doing in the series as a whole, you know, is not just recounting Plato's allegory, but applying it to the modern world in different ways, a lot of different ways. Our basic thing about allegory, of course, is that it's a consciously created symbol, and yes, Plato created the symbol to explain his own philosophy. But because it's so deep and powerful and profound, it has a variety of interpretations and continues to be really relevant today. Okay, so thank you for joining me, and thank you so much for your time and attention.